Have you ever had the same argument about money over and over again?
You mean like whether we spend too much or whether we are saving enough or
Exactly.
whether we have enough in savings? No, I've never had that.
Yeah, right. I don't believe that for 1 minute. But if you want to learn more about this phenomenon, stick with us because we got some tips for you. We all learn how to relate based on our connections with our parents. They're our first teachers.
Okay.
And of course, we learn from other people as well, our siblings and friends of the family, aunts and uncles, teachers. But our first teachers are our parents.
Okay.
And even from infancy, we're learning how to connect with people because of what they do with us. And across our lifetime, they serve as a model for us on how to relate, even to romantic partners.
So for better or for worse?
For better or worse, yeah. But they help us to have a kind of model for all kinds of relationships, including romantic partners.
Okay.
And the thing is that history has a way of repeating itself. So there's, as we talked about in the last video, there's a certain kind of pattern, very complex pattern to how we relate. And not just with our parents, but with everyone that we are connected with. And so have you ever noticed that you and your partner have relationship habits?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like things you repeat naturally.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's the 5 go-to meals that we make when we're at home, or, maybe the 6 restaurants that we rotate through, even though there's other places, or, what we order. So
do you have like inside jokes?
Oh, yes.
And do you have certain names you call each other under certain circumstances?
Yes.
Like affectionate names, or when you're slightly frustrated.
Fun moments to stir the pot.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So even like splitting up chores, like my wife and I have sort of patterns about how the chores are split up, right? And we just naturally do what we normally do, right?
Yeah.
So,
because if I do her stuff, it's been done wrong.
Yeah, I get it. Right. And so, I think the thing is that when we're talking about how we relate, we have to remember that the patterns of relating are incredibly complex. In fact, they're so complex that we don't even always recognize that it's a pattern. It seems not quite in our awareness, like we were talking about in the previous video, right?
Okay.
So those patterns are learned across your lifetime. And much of them come from your connection with your parents. So what we experience when we're relating to our parents has an impact also on our romantic relationships.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to talk about a few ways in which this impact might look.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one is, we're just talking about generally speaking, if you have an experience of a lot of love and support, then you're more likely to have the experience that there's enough around you.
Okay.
Right? That, including love or money, but anything else too, like there's enough for you. Now, there's a different way of thinking about this. So if you experienced others, like your parents or the people who took care of you, as not reliable in taking care of you, in other words, sometimes they'd take care of you, but not consistently. So you'd get your needs met sometimes, but not all the time. I'm not talking about 100% of it. No parent ever meets their kids' needs 100% of the time. That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about sometimes they do a really good job, and then it falls off for a week or a month.
So you're talking about kind of an unreliable,
very unreliable,
uncertain.
Yes.
Okay.
So in this kind of scenario, there's a good chance that you might long for connection, but have the experience that you're not sure you can trust your partner's love will always be there.
Okay. Even if that isn't predominantly the case.
That's right. You would expect the pattern that you've learned.
Right. Okay.
Right? So that's the second one. The third one is if you've experienced others as absent, either physically or emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really different things, right? And
Right.
being absent physically is like the parent is somewhere else.
Okay.
Being absent emotionally is that they might be present, but they're not paying attention to your emotional life.
Mm-hmm.
So you come home from school and having had a bad day, and you tell your parent that you had a bad day, and they seem completely uninterested,
Mm-hmm.
right? They just don't want to have anything to do with your emotional life.
Okay.
If that's the case, if there's absence physically or emotionally, that there's a good chance you'll want space, because you won't be sure whether you can count on someone,
Mm-hmm.
if they'll be there for you.
Now, when you say you'll want space, is this something you're aware that you want?
Sometimes, and sometimes not. So if you learn over time that you can't count on someone because they're not present for you,
Mm-hmm.
then you'll just sort of believe what you learned, right?
Mm-hmm.
That people aren't going to be there for you.
So I got to figure this out on my own.
Exactly. You'll have a sense of wanting independence. Independence will be important to you.
So even if the other person wants to help, my assumption is I've got to go this alone.
You'll be better on your own,
Mm-hmm.
because you
Interesting.
you can't know whether or not someone's going to be there for you.
Okay.
Okay?
And there's a fourth one?
There's a fourth one, and this one is a rough one. So if you've experienced the people who are supposed to love you as the source of physical or emotional pain, it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're the one causing pain in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a good chance you'll feel deeply conflicted about whether the relationships in life will be good for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have a sort of innate way of wanting the people who take care of us
Mm-hmm.
to be important in our life. We want to love them. We want to be
Right.
connected to them. But if they're the one who's hitting you,
Mm-hmm.
or who's berating you or humiliating you, then there's a kind of ambivalence that occurs.
Mm-hmm.
You learn that maybe the person who's supposed to love you is going to be the source of your suffering. So it causes a kind of relational pattern, sometimes conscious, sometimes not, that can be very, very difficult.
Now, you've listed 4.
Right.
We're trying to be somewhat concise in these videos. Is
Right.
there like 12 of these? Or
These are the 4.
the 4?
The 4. This is one way of this is one of many ways of thinking about how people relate.
Okay.
So this is all based on a specific kind of research.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to be real nerdy, you can go online and look up attachment theory.
Okay.
And that's what this points to. Right?
Okay.
So this is, and I've shortened everything. Like
Sure,
this, that
sure.
you would, books have been written on this subject.
Right.
So I've made it very concise right now. But if you wanted to look at it, you can. So your relational patterns are unique to you, and you bring them to your relationship. That's the basic idea we're talking about. In other words, however you learn to relate
Mm-hmm.
in your growing up, you learned that, and you're going to bring it into your relationship with your partner and your friends and everyone else, right?
So if you were newly married, you would probably be bringing a lot of energy from this parent relationship in,
For sure.
for sure. And then over time, after you've been married for a while, you would kind of create a new way to relate to your spouse.
Maybe.
Maybe
Maybe
maybe not.
Think about the things that you learned early in life in school,
Mm-hmm.
like math.
Right?
If you learned 2 + 2 is 4,
Mm-hmm.
it would take a lot to convince you that that wasn't true. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
This is basically the same phenomenon. What you learn in life, and I'm not talking about learn like in a single moment of your life. I'm talking about over decades, right?
Right. Right.
What you learn in life is hard to change.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a good chance that if you're newly married, like
Mm-hmm.
the example you're giving, there's a good chance that for some time you will just be applying what you learned to that relationship. That's
Sure.
all.
Sure.
So you may or may not change it.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to change it because what you learned is not helping in your relationship, then you'd have to become aware of the pattern that's there.
So I know we're going to get into some tips to kind of help
Yeah.
people through these kinds of challenges. But I've got to ask right off the get-go, is this something that I have or that you have or that they have power to address?
Yes, we're going to talk about that in the tips, but the answer is yes. The idea here is, to the extent that these patterns are not completely in our awareness, that we want to try to make them come into our awareness, to be conscious of them, because at the moment you're conscious of them, you have the chance to say, I don't like how this is going, and I would like to do something different. And I think of that as having freedom.
That sounds really powerful.
It is, because if you're doing a patterned relationship and you're not quite aware of why that's happening or where you learned it from, and you just keep doing it over and over, like the example we talked about at the beginning of the video, then there's this chance that the repetition will kind of degrade your relationship. Because we've all had that exasperation when we have the same argument over and over and it doesn't change. We don't get any resolution to it. It's normal to have that, by the way, but it still can be irritating.
Yeah. So hang with us. We're going to look at some ways to think about this and to work on it. If you like our videos, please hit like and subscribe. This will help us get more content like this to you. Remember that this is video 3 in a series of 6 on why it is that we argue about money. And also feel free to go to our website at relational-media.com. There you can check out our class, More Than a Budget. There we take a deep dive into relationships and money and how you can move forward as a couple.
So we looked at 4 different ways that people might learn how to relate, the different kinds of patterns of relating, but this is also true for how they think about money as well. So you might have learned a pattern of relating about money.
Because money was always part of a lot of the relationships.
Yes.
Even if it wasn't talking about the dollars, money was involved. Money was coming along for the ride through the whole process.
That's right. You learn, we, like I said before, we're just learning machines, right? And so you would have had an opportunity to observe everyone that was important to you thinking about and enacting their way of doing money.
Right.
And so that it would have been something that you learned and got incorporated into the pattern of your relating. So let's talk about a few tips that we might use in order to help us with how money goes in these relationship patterns.
Okay, great.
Okay? So the first one is, and we've said this, I don't know how many times. The first one is be persistently curious. Curiosity is so important, and curiosity is an attitude. So it sort of assumes that you're willing to give your partner the benefit of the doubt and that you're going to try to do something to help move the relationship forward.
You know, this is a real challenge because I know that you've mentioned this a few times, but these moments where we deal with these patterns, or as we talked about in the last video, these processes, when those get challenged, in other words, when we kind of go, hey, that doesn't fit here and it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, having our partner be curious in that moment really requires that we be a little bit vulnerable.
Absolutely. You have to be open to the possibility that your partner could say something that might feel uncomfortable, but also be helpful. And I think that's a really key point. I think we have to be willing not to settle for superficial answers to things. And so that's a part of what you're just saying now. Not only do you need to be open and vulnerable, but not just take the first answer as being the only one for how you understand a pattern in your relating.
One of the things that we talk about in our class, More Than a Budget, is the idea that it's really good to have a date night or set aside a time every once in a while where you can kind of bring these things up and you both get the opportunity to prepare your mind a little bit, that you're going into this space to be curious, to trust your partner to help you think through something that for whatever reason your brain doesn't necessarily want to necessarily visit.
Right.
So the idea is that curiosity in the moment sometimes can be really hard, But that's not an excuse to not be curious about it later, too.
Right. So when you're going out on your date night, or when you have that extra time available to you to talk through whatever is going on, I think it's really important to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're asking questions, make sure that you're allowing your partner the full range to answer them.
Mm-hmm.
You might have a view about what those answers are. Let your partner answer so that you're understanding their experience, right? The purpose of being curious is that you would understand their experience.
So I would have to assume that even though I might think I know what's going on, I probably still don't have all the information.
You got to set your opinion aside.
Mm-hmm.
You might be right,
Mm-hmm.
or you might not.
Mm.
But most likely, if you're right about something, it's only a sliver of the truth
Right.
of that thing.
Right.
So make some space in this curiosity for multiple things to be going on at the same time.
Okay.
All right, so number 2, we want to be able to connect the dots between how your partner relates to you
Mm-hmm.
to how your partner relates about money.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, obviously we all learned about money in relationships, and we have all kinds of attitudes that we learned from the actions of our parents and other important people in our life. And, if our partner has an attitude that there's plenty of love, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
they may also think that money matters will also work out. There's plenty of money.
It'll get solved.
Irrespective of the objective truth of that, right? So
Yeah.
if you have $10 or $1 million,
It'll work
they
out.
might have an attitude
Yeah.
that's a part of their pattern of relating.
Mm-hmm.
And so conversely, if they think they aren't going to have enough love, right, it's possible that they'll also think there won't be enough money.
Mm-hmm.
So again, no matter what the objective numbers say, there's this possibility that they would imagine that the pattern of relating applies to money as well. So what we want to do is pay attention to those ways of relating.
Mm-hmm.
Notice them.
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 3. After you learn about how your partner relates and how you relate, you have to know both,
Mm-hmm.
right? Make sure that you show compassion for their experience often, repeatedly, right? Compassion, super important. So you might not actually like something that you're learning about your partner.
Mm-hmm.
This is not an opportunity for you to tell them that you don't like it. This is
Yeah.
an opportunity to tell them something that's empathic or compassionate. Because it's possible that this thing that you've been discussing is something that's painful to them.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to be supportive. Remember your partners,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like your job is to care for your partner, right?
So move forward together.
Yeah, so, these patterns can be tough. And, it's not always your job to change your partner,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's their job. But it is your job to be kind, right?
Mhm.
So be sure you're kind. Okay, number 4. Remember that to really improve how money works in your relationship, you're going to need to address both the concrete thing. We talked before about arguments like about purchasing a shoe or purchasing
Yeah.
some shoes, right? So the concrete thing, whatever the difficulty in that argument is, I disagree with our savings, I disagree with our spending, whatever the concrete thing is, you're going to have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to deal with the relational pattern too.
Right.
You can't do one and not do the other. Because if you don't especially take care of the pattern, then the argument around whatever decision you made related to money
Mm-hmm.
is just going to happen in a loop. You're going to be stuck
So
with it.
you could be right that, hey, we don't have enough money for me to go buy a new pair of shoes.
Yes.
And you could be wrong about the fact that I feel like I need them.
Yes. That's right.
And so in that moment, we both, as a couple, need to understand those are different components. They work together. And maybe they need to be understood separately, but
That's
they
right.
will come back together as this complicated soup of how we do business.
That's right. You got to deal with the actual spending,
Mhm.
and you got to deal with whatever that thing is that says I deserve to spend money on this, or
Mhm.
I want to spend money on this, even if you don't have the money.
Mhm.
You got to deal with both for sure. So if you're in a new relationship, and these patterns aren't fully developed and not played out in that relationship, it's important also to sort of keep in mind that you could build something new together.
Right.
And if you've been in a relationship long term and you've actually had these patterns repeat themselves over and over, just be sure to remember that change is possible, because if you're persistent about noticing how the patterns work between the two of you and paying attention to being gentle and kind, then you have this opportunity to make some slow change over time.
And I think this gets back to what we've been talking about for a long time, that your values really matter, your shared values really matter.
Yeah.
Because those become the things that you can both rally around and say, this is the finish line that we want to cross together. And maybe we're having these troubles here, but as we both look forward to this place that we both want to go, this can kind of drive us through those moments of uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
It can drive us past those things that we tend to, whether you say go and hide or feel like we need to go on our own or everything's going to be great. I can actually go, no, but this is where I want to go.
Yeah, being pointed in the same direction is really important.
So, hey, thanks for watching us again today. Help us grow our channel by hitting like and subscribe. And if you'd like to find out more about our class, More Than a Budget, check out relational-media.com. You can also look for our other 5 videos on YouTube where we kind of help answer this question of why it is that couples are always arguing about money. And of course, always stay curious.